Shipwreck at the Bottom of the World, Ocean Camp, Chapter 8. Over the next few days, the men made several trips back to dump camp and the wrecked ship to salvage everything they could, including the third lifeboat. More precious food stores, cases of nuts, boxes of sugar, crates of barley, flour, and jam were sledged back to the new camp, dubbed Ocean Camp by the men. In all, they rescued more than 3 tons of food. McNeish pried nails from Endurance's distorted decking and made a stockpile of scrap lumber, including the lumber that had been meant for the expedition's winter hut. Other men tried to retrieve some of their own personal items abandoned in the rush, particularly books. They knew they would have a lot of time on their hands and very little to do. Howe and Blackwell waded through the icy water that flooded the below-deck cabins and brought out an important treasure from the darkroom, Frank Hurley's box of glass photographic plates. There were more than 400 of them, documenting the voyage and ordeal of the Endurance. But they weighed far too much to save all of them. Hurley was faced with the heartbreaking task of selecting which few to keep. He and Shackleton sat on the snow, picking and choosing among the best pictures, smashing the rejects as they went to keep from changing their minds. In the end, they whittled the number down to 150 photographs. Hurley also kept a Kodak pocket camera and 3 rolls of film, with which he documented the remainder of the crew's odyssey. The talented Hurley was also skilled as a metalworker. Using the few tools they saved, he fashioned 2 camp stoves, one using the ash chute from the ship's boilers, and another smaller one from the ash bucket. Both of these stoves were stoked with seal blubber and could boil 2.5 gallons of water from ice in half an hour. The carpenter took apart the wheelhouse from the ship and rebuilt it at Ocean Camp for a galley, and the larger hot potato can, as the stove was called, was installed inside. Green set up this new galley and was soon serving up hot stews, teas, and cocoa. The thick, greasy smoke from the blubber stove turned his face black and regularly sent him bursting outside, coughing and choking, but he remained cheerful. Shackleton had also drafted plans for each man's duty in an emergency. These orders were written up and posted on the tents, and the boss let it be known that he might at any time give a false alarm as a drill. It was now November, and although the 6th of the month brought a blizzard, the Antarctic summer was reaching its peak. On November 12th, the temperature soared to 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and several men took advantage of the warmth to take a wash in the snow. With the water so hard to come by, and the weather usually so cold, keeping clean was a luxury. As for going to the bathroom, the men had to find a convenient ice hummock to squat behind for privacy. Their floor was soon dirty with blubber, soot, dog droppings, seal skins, penguin heads, and other garbage. But the men all adjusted to the new set of standards without complaint. They were alive. What did it matter? The ice pack, with Ocean Camp piggybacking along, made a steady 3 miles north every day. If the men could be patient, the ice would carry them closer to their destination. All they had to do was wait, just as they had done while trapped on the ship. But now they had even less to do and much more discomfort as well. Living quarters were cramped. There were 5 canvas tents to hold 28 members of the crew. Some of the men were able to fashion wooden floors using scrap lumber, and others used sealskin for ground cloths. But even so, the rising temperatures outside and body heat inside meant that the snow beneath them was constantly melting. The men were soaking wet all the time and had to become ingenious in finding ways to keep their possessions dry. They constructed rickety shelves from packing crates and hung their gear from tent poles or stored it in empty cans. During the warm days, when the men went about their business on the floe, the softening ice frequently gave way underfoot, plunging them into cold water up to their waists. At first, the men were not miserable. The sun shone more than 20 hours a day, and they knew they were on their way north. Optimism remained high. If the pack carried them north fast enough, they could reach the edge of the ice and be able to launch the boats. Frank Worsley pored over his navigational charts, studying possible courses. He plotted courses to Paulet Island, Elephant Island, Clarence Island, even far off South Georgia Island, where they had last set foot on land. Every day when he took his sightings with the sextant calculated their position, the crew eagerly waited to hear how far they had traveled. Sometimes it was a useless mile to the west or east. Sometimes it was a heartening run dead north. Slowly but surely, they were on their way out of Antarctica's grip. McNeish busied himself preparing the boats. With scrap lumber from Endurance and a small and precious collection of used nails, he began raising the sides of the boats to make them more seaworthy. I have only a saw, hammer, chisel, and adze, but we are managing all right, he reported in his diary. He filled the seams between the new plank with wool yarn unraveled from a scarf and then caulked them with Martenson's oil paints. McNeish had every right to be proud of his ingenuity. The rest of the men occupied themselves the best they could. Martens continued painting, using his remaining paint and the lids of packing crates for canvases. Others spent their days hunting seals and penguins, which had returned with the warmer weather. One afternoon, McLean, the first officer, Lionel Greenstreet, went out in search of seals, finding a small floe near an open lead. They jumped onto the floe and began paddling around with ski poles, like boys on a raft. Shackleton was not amused. He hated unnecessary risks and disapproved of such shenanigans, knowing that leopard seals and killer whales could easily surface inside a lead and make a quick meal of them. On November 21st, 1915 brought an unforgettable evening. Most of the men were lying in their tents reading or playing cards. Shackleton, restless as always, was standing on an ice hill that the men frequently used for a lookout tower. In their tents, the men suddenly heard the boss cry out, "She's going, boys!" Struggling out onto the ice, the crew witnessed the last of Endurance, a mile and a half away as her bows went under. Then the ship dived quickly, and the ice closed over her with a rush. At 5 p.m., she went down by the head. The stern was the last to go under the water. Shackleton recorded it in his diary that night. I cannot write about it. The long-delayed death of their ship sent a wave of sadness and depression over the crew. While she lasted, Endurance had been a visible link to the world they once knew. Now they were utterly alone on the sea of ice. Tempers began to wear thin in the close quarters. From time to time, Shackleton would reassign men to different tents to keep them from getting on each other's nerves. He always found some excuse for these moves besides breaking up quarrels. But always, when he transferred the men, He reminded them that they could survive only by cooperating. Shackleton couldn't let the men brood for long. With the advantage of the spring, the floe was eroding at the edges. Sometimes a whole chunk would break away. In addition, the accumulation of black soot and debris around the camp was soaking up the heat of the sun and warming the floe, turning the surface to slush. On December 1st, the boss decided to move 50 yards to a new clean site and set up their camp on firmer ice. And on December 5th, he declared a holiday in honor of the anniversary of their departure from South Georgia Island. Meanwhile, the drift of ice had shifted to the east, taking them farther away from possible landing sites. Shackleton and his most trusted advisors frequently debated their options and kept themselves ready to move. If the ice took them toward the east, they could reach open water with no near landfalls. If it took them west, their chances were better. They knew that they would have to head west over the ice again if their position didn't improve. Macklin described what a visitor might see if he stumbled upon Ocean Camp at midnight. He would not notice that it was still light, the sun never setting at this time of year in this latitude. He would have to pass a line of dogs, tethered in teams to wires secured at one end to their own loaded sledges, and at the other to an iron standcoin driven deeply in the snow. The sledge trace is in position and the harnesses all secured in place and ready to be put on the dogs. The sledges are loaded and lashed, and everything ready to be moved at a moment's notice. For the first 3 weeks of December, the pack was constantly on the move, but each time it edged toward the east, away from the Antarctic Peninsula and its outlying islands, Shackleton became anxious. Their floe was continuing to decay rapidly, so the boss made a decision on December 21st. They would strike camp again and head west over the ice, trying to narrow the gap between themselves and the islands. They would spend the 22nd celebrating Christmas and start for Paulet Island on December 23rd. It was midsummer in the Antarctic. The weather from now on would begin to go downhill. Shackleton made the holiday a celebration. He allowed the men to eat as much as they desired. "We consumed most of our small remaining stock of luxuries," he wrote later. For the last time for 8 months, we really had as much as we could eat. Anchovies and oil, baked beans, and jugged hare made a glorious mixture. They also feasted on ham and sausages, canned milk, biscuits, coffee, pickles, parsnips, and peaches. Then, on the 23rd, the men harnessed themselves to the boats again and resumed the back-breaking haul across the ice.